I'm Metallic Joe, and I just leveled up.
Congratulations.
Yay! Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 6th edition of 240p Club. Today, we are going to be talking about a genre that's actually very dear and near to us.
RPGs! Yay!
Yay!
Role-playing games, yay.
It's hard to spell RPG sometimes.
Okay.
This is Cloud right next to us. We're just going to call him Cloud for today.
Yeah, you're Cloud today. Well, no, Cloud's usually like mellow and emo and crap.
Yeah.
Nah, he's Kefka, I think. No, I don't know.
I don't think
He
would be
wasn't.
Kefka.
He wasn't even really emo until the movie.
That's true. Well, yeah, that's true.
I don't know. Can we compare him to any character? We'll just say he's Edgar. No, Edgar's brother.
Seven?
Seven, yeah.
Nah.
He likes to fight people. Flynn just
Kyle.
messes people up in the pit.
I'm Kyle from Final Fight Streetwise.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, now continuing on. Yeah, we are talking about RPGs today. This is a two-part podcast, actually. For the first part, we'll be talking about RPGs. The second part, you'll see next week. We have a top 5 Final Fantasy list, followed by a top 10 RPG list, as voted by our panel over here.
We actually did want to put, we were kind of deciding, okay, do we put Final Fantasy games in our top 10, or do we keep it separate? But there's just so many Final Fantasies, we all couldn't really decide. And not only that, the top 10 would have probably been all Final Fantasies. So
Been halfway Final Fantasy games, so...
Yeah, so we decided to keep it separate.
Yeah, and plus there was a lot of other series. To limit it to 10 is ridiculous, but we're going to try anyway. And taking out the Final Fantasy games, we do have a close top 10. Anyway, RPGs, what are they?
Role-playing games!
Be more specific.
They're epic adventures, probably the most epic to take place on classic consoles at the very least. Usually at the beginning you would have battles that were turn-based and would kind of come up out of nowhere. And later on they got a little bit more open-ended. Like as consoles got more powerful, you would be able to actually see the battles on the field as opposed to just being whisked away to them.
Now, to be clear, most RPGs are fantasy based, but there are a few that do either in a future setting. Final Fantasy VI has a steampunk setting, which is Victorian era with almost modern technology. It's basically the gear and steam was developed instead of gasoline and diesel engines.
And mecha suits.
Yeah, mecha suits.
I want my mecha suit back!
Yeah, Nikki wants her Magitech armor back.
Exactly.
Of course, there's games that are also in a modern setting, like, of course, the Mother series, very near and dear to my heart, and apparently, from what I'm hearing or played or seen so far, the Persona series for, PlayStation, which people have been bugging me to play for a while now. I'm just getting into that, actually.
Now, RPGs, most people think of turn-based combat, the active battle systems. However, RPG elements have been popping into games for years. Even with traditional RPGs like the Dragon Quest series, and then US known as Dragon Warrior, the original Final Fantasy, Phantasy Star, all kinds of other games. You have the turn-based combat, random enemies. You also have the leveling up system, which found its way to a bunch of adventure games, too. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, had a leveling up system, and actually so did Castlevania 2. These weren't really considered traditional RPGs. You also had the action RPG, which you consider the Soul Blazer series, Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terra Enigma are all in that series. They're action RPGs. Strategy RPGs, the Shining Force series is a big example of that. And Final Fantasy Tactics is semi-modern. That came out in 97, so that was a little closer.
I believe the Fire Emblem series is similar to strategy.
It is, yeah. Fire Emblem is a big strategy RPG.
And now it's Waifu Wars, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, let's not get started on that.
We're not, don't worry. We are not, I can assure you, everyone, we are not going to start talking about Waifu Wars. It's just something that's just completely irrelevant and just asinine.
Yeah, no. Here's the thing with RPGs. Most of our audience, I think, knows what an RPG is, has played quite a few of them. We did a pretty unscientific poll between us as to some top 5 games, some top 10, top 5 Final Fantasy, top 10 regular RPGs that aren't Final Fantasy. We squeezed a few action RPGs, some strategy RPGs in the list. You'll just have to wait to see your list later. But what RPGs do you guys hold dear?
Well, not going too far into the list, though, I have to gush and tell everybody, scream to the top of the world about how much I love the Chrono Trigger game.
Yeah, Chrono Trigger was like a spin-off of Final Fantasy, in a way. If everyone doesn't know, it was designed by, the artwork anyway, was designed by Akira Toriyama, who's famous for the Dragon Ball series, and who actually did the anime of the Chrono Trigger series that you see in the PlayStation version and actually the Nintendo DS version.
Mm-hmm. Let's not forget that he also did the artwork for the Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior series, which is, of course, way bigger in Japan than it is over here. But that's a pretty big deal. It's like one of the most popular game series over there.
Yeah, you also have RPGs aren't native to just any system. Although I don't believe they had them on the Atari 2600, of course.
There was one. There was Dragon Stomper, which was for the Supercharger, add-on for the Atari, and the Supercharger, you would play games through a cassette. You would have to play the cassette tape back to load the data for the game. But
was it more text-based, or was it more
It was pretty text-based, but you had an overworld, and you could see the battles and stuff.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, because the genre, I think, really was born on the PC because it was the easiest to program. Again, we talked about text-based RPGs like MUDs a couple issues ago. They were easy to program onto a PC. It evolved from a choose-your-own-adventure type game to more of some of the RPG elements we see now. King's Quest, of course, was I guess more point and click, but it had some of the basic RPG elements in it.
And of course, mods would eventually evolve into MMORPGs like EverQuest, World of Warcraft.
Yeah, that's one thing we could talk about, actually, MMORPGs as well. That basically MMORPGs evolved after multi-user dungeons and a lot of the console RPGs. They decided, hey, what would happen if we put all these RPG elements into a massive overworld? I know it wasn't the first MMORPG, but the first one I ever played was Ultima Online. And I guess that was more action-based, but it still had some RPG elements. You didn't level up so much as you gained abilities as you went on. And they were number-based system, 1 to 100. The more you used something, the more you mastered it. And the more it affected your health, magic, and stamina stats. The game, when I played it anyway, I know it evolved something different, but when I played it back in 97, 98, it used to be a big avenue for player killing.
And the one I played for several years was EverQuest, of course. I was addicted to it for a long time. And the game did have a lot of levels and stuff, and many classes, each of which had their own specific role. And of course, the big thing I don't think Joe mentioned was raiding. You would have these big targets that took up to 72 people to kill at times. I think the cap eventually got reduced to 54, but requires a lot of coordination and a lot of skill and decent gear to take these targets down and get the best loot in the game.
By that point as well, most games evolved. When we played Ultima Online and EverQuest, we used to connect to IRC, Internet Relay Chat, for those of you that haven't been on the internet too long. IRC, eventually evolved into you had a microphone and started talking, which now is a feature of every modern console.
Every single game in existence, pretty much.
Microphone, you connect to the server, you can talk while you're playing, you can talk shit while you're playing.
Of course.
You can rage quit, fuck you, fuck, and then you disconnect the system.
I've had someone, this is kind of going a little off topic, but I'm actually pretty decent at Mortal Kombat 9, so when I play that online with people, I get hate mail, people saying that they want to come to my house and beat me up, and the best thing is my name, my username on PlayStation sounds kind of feminine, so it's kind of oh, they realize they are yelling and saying mean stuff to a girl.
And they just got beat by a girl.
And you got beat up by a girl. And I play as Melina. I don't remember how to do her fatality, but then I realized something even more disrespectful is her slap finisher. So I'll just walk up to them, slap them across the face, game over. Like, I find that more disrespectful, honestly, than ripping the guy's head off and eating his face.
No, that kind of evolved rage quitting with not necessarily rage quitting, but the shit talk online and everything. Kind of evolved with World of Warcraft more than anything, because it got so popular that it attracted people from all walks of life, including gamers that, you know, once everything went wrong, you curse out, you know, your party members, this, that.
It even managed a South Park episode.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
the South Park episode was hilarious.
Mm-hmm. But there were, like, videos on YouTube where, like, the guy would lose a level or so, or, like, his mother would tell him, turn off the computer, because I think at that point everything was dial-up, so it's like, well, I want to use the phone, or I want to watch TV or something, and he's like, Mom, I don't want to turn this off. I want to keep playing. So he would start, like, destructing everything, breaking his computer, breaking this, breaking that. I think a lot of those are more like parody videos, but there are some that I don't know, and I can't tell if it's parody or if it's not.
I know they also had a they had a video in the guy lost at FIFA at the like 90th minute, which is the very last second, like the very last possible second you can lose. He lost, grabbed his PlayStation, disconnected it, threw it right out a window. They had it on video. It was hilarious.
My PlayStation is my baby. I can't possibly think of doing anything.
But yeah,
like that.
the funny part is we're going to go back a ways. EverQuest actually had this was the first game I am aware of. I know there's probably more before it. First game I'm aware of that people that played got basically level capped, some of the most elite gear in the game, decided, hey, I'm done playing, but I spent all this time getting all my gear, so I'm going to sell my account on eBay. And I know a few people that got upwards of $700 for an EverQuest account, level maxed with ridiculous amounts of elite equipment that you couldn't find anywhere. So obviously, you know, game companies took this into consideration.
This is still a thing, of course, and at least in EverQuest, a lot of players frowned on the practice because you would have the character and all the gear, but you didn't play the character from the beginning, and you don't have the skill required to like perform at the high level they expect you to in these like elite dungeons. So it got pretty annoying that way, especially later on when they got more complicated and stuff.
Oh yeah, but that basically, from the RPG genre, that evolved into basically a modern thing where you pay for gear and everything, including, like, Electronic Arts is definitely guilty of this one, selling some elite stuff. Yes, selling elite stuff on all these games in order to get farther quicker, so you won't have to level up, and also selling stuff that is required to get farther into the game that you can't find otherwise. Exclusive content also for pre-ordering the game. All this came from the RPG genre, which, you know, going back to its humble beginnings, back to Phantasy Star, back to all these games from the 80s, you wanted to beat something, you had to, like, basically level grind, and, you know, this was a staple of RPGs for years. And then, you know, once the MMORPG came along, instead of level grinding, hey, I could just pay someone for their account, or pay someone for their items. You know, that's kind of how aspect of modern gaming evolved. But yeah, going back to RPGs, like, you know, way back, well before MMORPGs, you didn't have the internet with walkthroughs, so you had to figure out most of everything through either grinding it out yourself or talking to people that also had the game and they find something different as well.
A lot of these early RPGs for the early consoles, like Phantasy Star 1 and Dragon Quest 1 and Final Fantasy also, were very grindy. Like, you would spend like at least an hour getting to an appropriate level before you could like tackle the next dungeon.
Also, depending on your skill level, if you were having issues with a certain level, certain dungeon, the only thing you could do is level up your characters at that point, because, you know, and that caused a lot of frustration, but at the same time you were determined to see what happens next. So you sat on, like, you know, basically level grinding, you sat onto an easy dungeon or like just an easy part of the overworld where the enemies were plenty, and you just sat there, walked back and forth, got into random combats until you had enough experience points where you could take a few hits in the harder dungeons.
Now, as these RPGs got more popular, of course, they like streamlined the curve a bit, so you wouldn't just have to stand in one place for an hour. You could actually like proceed through the dungeons. You would still have to fight battles, but you wouldn't just have to like stand around doing boring grinding. You could just do it as you went.
It kind of came to a head in Final Fantasy VIII for traditional RPGs because you could theoretically finish that game at level 12 because all the other enemies leveled up with you depending on how high your level went. So theoretically, you could finish that in a pretty easy level, without any sort of level grinding whatsoever. Just some of the elite attacks you didn't really see unless you grinded up your level a bit.
They also gave you the option to run away from battles, but of course, it's like, well, why would you? You would want to level up. But I remember specifically Final Fantasy IV would actually have you drop money if you ran away.
Yes. Yeah, you drop money to run away from battles. And of course, most of these games you couldn't run away from boss battles.
Mm-hmm. A couple earlier games, like again the first Final Fantasy and the first Dragon Quest, you would have to like run from battles in the final dungeon to save up for the boss because of how nasty he was. And of course, in the first Final Fantasy, if you had like a thief in your party, he could almost guaranteed run from any battle you could run from, so it made the game a lot easier.
I just grinded in the original Final Fantasy. I just remember grinding like so much. I had a martial artist in my group, and martial artists towards the end of that game did so much damage that I would just kill some of the more elite monsters in the Chaos Shrine.
And that's what I also noticed about with Final Fantasy IV is because I like to put Yang in my team a lot, and Yang just like completely wrecks everything in front of him.
Until you get to like later on, like then Yang gets you'll see.
Yeah.
Nikki's playing through it again.
I'm playing through it again, yeah, at the moment. It's been a couple years, so the memory's a little hazy, but the only thing is, Yang is the only one I can use in the,
that cave, with the magnetic cave when you're fighting the Elf King.
Yeah, because I kind of made the mistake of not giving Cecil, who else is on my team? It's Cecil,
I believe at that point it was Cessa, Cid, Tella,
Cid, yeah.
And Yang.
Yeah, because the two...
Kain and Rosa, or, Kain kidnapped Rosa,
right.
And you gotta find them. Yeah,
and I'm not telling you what happened to the twins.
Yeah, we're not giving you any more spoilers, but you'll see. If you want to play that game, again, definitely track down a copy. I recommend the Game Boy
Advance version.
Advanced version has an extra dungeon, but
and
you
the
could also
designs are cute.
Also, the PSP version is really good. The Final Fantasy Complete series.
I would recommend the PSP version because the Game Boy Advance version has kind of a glitch in battles that makes it too easy. But that's just me.
I did notice the easy curve in that game because I ended up dying more times in the beginning of 6 than I died in the entire 4.
Well, 6 is easier to do than 4. That's the funny part.
So I guess that just means I suck. Oh, man. Well,
you know what, to be fair...
You learn something new every day.
To be fair, when first playing through 6, you will die quite a bit, just because you have to figure out what to do in certain situations. But once you figure it out, it gets infinitely easier. Also, finding items and not selling off the good items you need, So anyway, RPGs have been around for many years now, and we're talking about some of our favorites. I mentioned the action RPG. Any of you ever played the Shining Force series?
I have not.
I have not played it, no.
I have played Secret of Mana, which is pretty similar.
Not to the Shining Force. Secret of Mana is more similar to the Soul Blazer series. That was Square's answer basically to the Soul Blazer series, because Enix, Square Enix weren't one company at that time. They were definitely competitive.
Squaresoft and
Enix Limited. They competed. You had Dragon Quest on one side, Final Fantasy on the other, and they were definite rivals. It was like Nintendo and Sega almost, only except they didn't have consoles. They just had gaming licenses. So yeah, the Soul Blazer series, and the answer to that was the Shining Force, not Shining Force, the Soul Blazer series, the answer to that was the Secret of Mana. Or, how do you say it in Japanese?
Seiken Densetsu, I believe.
Yeah, Seiken Densetsu.
Sacred Sword Legend.
Yeah, they had a part 2 as well. They also had Secret of Evermore, which was a similar type game, but that was... I want to say science fiction almost, because you start off in the 50s, and thanks to a small town in the U.S., and thanks to some experiment, you wind up in some alternate worlds. Well, it was a cool game. Again, very similar to Secret of Mana. But the Shining Force series was a Sega release game it was a strategy RPG. Your characters leveled up, you got experience points, but battles were massive. It's basically you had an army of up to about 20 units. You had 12. The enemy armies were varying in size. But basically, your characters can move around the battlefield a certain amount. You counter an enemy, you attack an enemy. The next turn, it was very turn-based, depending on how the unit's speed. So you would move 1 or 2 units, and then it would go to your enemy. Your enemy would move a unit, it would go back to you eventually. Enemies had different attacks, you had magic. You got to level up, and the level cap was 20 in that game. If you leveled up to 10 or higher, you get to upgrade your character class, which resets it to level 1, but you get to equip the more elite weapons, and you have different abilities, including some characters gain the ability to fly, and some characters gain instead of archers, you had crossbows, and the Shining Force 2 is the crowning achievement of that series. Although there were plenty of other ones. Shining Force CD was a remake. They made 3 games for the Game Gear in Japan. Only one seen a U.S. release, which is Sword of Hadra. But yeah, these are strategy RPGs. I guess you could consider them more strategy games, but the series capped out with Shining Force 3 on the Sega Saturn, which was actually a decent game. It was just, the story was so complicated because you had basically a 10-minute introduction talking about some impending war and an impending attack on this town. And, a lot of the other games didn't really do that. Basically, they just threw you into, the town gets attacked, and then bam, you're on your quest to, find the malevolent god that was causing, the world to go into chaos.
I believe Shining Force 3 was also a 3-part game, and only the first part got released in the U.S.
Yeah, it was. It's actually supposed to be a 3-part game, but they combined elements from the first and second part of that game and released it for the Sega Saturn in the U.S. But in Japan, it was a 3-part series, on 3 discs. But that was the end of the Shining Force series. It evolved into an RPG. There was also Shining in the Darkness, which was a traditional RPG based on that series. It's not as popular, though. You also have... There's a few other sequels.
Shining the Holy Ark.
Yeah, Shining the Holy Ark was one of them. It's basically, these games I don't have too much experience for, so... of course, as technology kind of, developed over the years in the early 90s, the CD system started coming out. Sega CD, these days, is known basically for Sonic CD, for all the games that were released at launch, but Sega CD had a wealth of pretty good RPGs. A company called Working Designs released the Lunar series, which was basically they put RPG elements with a couple anime scenes inside. And the Lunar series was pretty good. Vey was another series in that line of games, but it was a separate game. But Working Designs. Trying to think of what other. Cosmic Fantasy, I think, was one from Working Designs. There's a few other ones. Popful Mail, that was a more cutesy RPG type game.
It was a side scroller.
That was more of a side scroller. That was Working Designs, though. I think it had some RPG elements in it, though. Once the technology developed, games, they put FMVs in them, full motion videos, and of course, we've seen that peak with Final Fantasy VII, which is at the time one of the most expensive games ever released.
Yeah, that pretty much ushered in the golden age of RPGs, at least over here, because the PlayStation just had a huge wealth of them, and it exploded after Final Fantasy VII came out.
What other PlayStation RPGs can you think of? Obviously, no Breath of Fire 3 and 4.
There was Wild Arms, there was Suikoden, I think Arc the Lad, and we had Dragon Warrior 7
I think wasn't that when the Ys series started coming out?
Yeah.
The one that starts with a Y, Ys.
Oh, the Ys, yeah,
Yeah.
1 and 2. Well, no, they came out for NES, but they were remade.
Right, they were remade, because I remember around, like, they started re-releasing these for the PSP also.
Yeah, that was
lot
the
of
thing
them.
also, like, when some of these systems came out, they had, Square especially had this wealth of old games. So they finally released 5 in this country, which was for PlayStation with a... It came with, in this country, it was Final Fantasy 4 and 5, I believe, and then Final Fantasy 6 was tacked on with Chrono Trigger.
Now 5 and 6 were together, and
5, 6, and 4 was with 4.
Chrono Trigger was bundled with 4.
Yeah, I hear that the Final Fantasy series was supposedly going to be that company's last game. And it pretty much
The
saved it.
rumor was Square was running out of money because Square's library at the time for Nintendo. This is going back to 1988. This their right before they developed Final Fantasy. The rumor was Square was running out of money, had to produce a hit. The games at the time, 3D World Runner and the Rad Racer series.
King's Knight.
I never played King's Knight.
That's a Square game, I believe. It's like a top-down shooter.
I believe they did something on like a game show, or no, that's Rare. I'm sorry, that was Anticipation. That was Rare Company. Square basically had these games. They weren't hits by any means. 3D World Runner is actually a fun game, but it's not a classic by any means. So they're running out. This is the story. They were supposedly running out of money and had to produce a hit. So they had this game. They were playing with the title. They had the word fantasy, so they had to think of something to go with F. Like that would roll off the tongue. So they thought of the word final because if this will be the final game for Square if this doesn't succeed. That was the way the story went. No, regardless of if that's true or not, it's a great story to tell.
They had a simple story. They pulled a bunch of monsters and elements from Dungeons and Dragons, and there you go. It was a hit.
It was a smash hit, actually. Now, I believe Dragon Quest came out before that, right?
Yeah, Dragon Quest it's one of the biggest game series in Japan. Over here, it's kind of underground, but...
Yeah, it was released here. Dragon Quest was released here as Dragon Warrior, and I believe the series peaked in the U.S. with Dragon Warrior 2, because that was the most advertised of the series.
And I remember they started re-releasing, and I don't know if it was re-releasing or making just new Dragon Quest games. I believe they started calling them Dragon Quest over here again, because they started putting them on the game, not the Game Boy, I'm sorry, the 3DS.
Yeah, at that point, it was well publicized that Dragon Warrior was Dragon Quest in Japan, so they just decided to keep up with the naming. The same thing happened to the Final Fantasy series. Final Fantasy 2 in this country, in the U.S., was actually Final Fantasy 4 in Japan. So we didn't see the actual 2 and 3 on NES until... Actually, we've never seen them on NES. Like, we've seen a official remake of 1 and 2 on... the
PlayStation.
Yeah, it was actually the first system to come out for was the PlayStation, and then eventually they made it for the PSP. 3 was eventually released for PSP and Nintendo DS, completely remastered. If you wanted to play the original, you had to do fan translations basically on emulators, or just had to learn Japanese.
It's not easy, let me tell you.
No, especially
I'm trying.
Especially in the Japanese characters.
I mean, I understand a little bit of them, because I play the Samurai Warrior series in Japanese, so I was able to understand, this character is a K, this character is... Well, the way their characters are, one character in Japanese is actually 2 English characters. So, we could have one, it would be for instance, let's just say the character's name was Kojiro. So it would be one character for KO, one character for J, and etc., etc. I'm dyslexic, so I'm not going to say anymore.
You can read minds?
If I could read minds, I would be the most powerful person in the world.
She would be a level 60 mage.
Exactly. Which means I can use one finger, split you up in the air, and throw you out the window.
Polymorph.
Yeah, that too.
Anamorph?
Yeah, turn you into a sheep.
Yeah! Anyhow, so yeah, learning Japanese, it's fun. I think you should all give it a try sometime.
Yeah, I'm not going to give it a try.
Okay. Well, then you'll just use me as a translator.
Yeah, I'll do that, or I'll just like find a fan translation.
Yeah.
Another aspect of Final Fantasy lore, the horrible, they weren't horrible translations. They were rushed. A guy named Dan Osen for Nintendo had, I believe, a couple weeks only to localize Final Fantasy VI when it was released here. And some of the translations, some of the humor got kind of lost along the way.
It was Ted Woolsey, wasn't it?
Ted Woolsey was doing it. Dan Osen was La Zelda series.
Didn't they also like completely screw up the female lead's character name?
Oh,
No, they changed the character of FF6. You mean?
Yes.
Yeah, her name was.
Her name was originally supposed to be Tina.
Her name was
but-
Tina in Japan, and they purposely changed it because over in Japan, Tina's like an exotic name, so they changed it to Terra here because that sounds a bit more exotic. Tina's a bit too common.
and it kind of goes with the story. That's a change that was, I think, well supported by the fan base anyway.
Yeah.
Terra
sounds
is
more-
like a word for Earth,
Yeah.
and basically, that's one of the concepts of Final Fantasy VI. You're saving the Earth, or this world
It's a
that's
cute
supposed to be
name,
the
too.
Earth. Yeah. But what was I saying about translation? Woolsey only had 2 weeks, or I think something like that, to translate Final Fantasy VI. He did a wonderful job with it, but there were a few mistranslations, and of course, Nintendo censorship had to
Come in.
do its thing. Because you couldn't say the word shit or anything like that,
You
or
couldn't say the word die, which
Yeah, a lot of Kefka's speeches were taken out. Like, I'm gonna smash you in a barbecue instead of I'm going to kill you.
yeah. When I'm not gonna spoil it because this, I will spoil it a bit because this is early on in Final Fantasy VI when Kefka torches Edgar's castle. He's like, "Welcome to my barbecue," And there was another monster. In the they retranslated it into in future editions for the Game Boy Advance when they had Final Fantasy VI Advance. You're fighting something called Atma Weapon, which is the
original name was supposed to be Ultima Weapon, but
and they
could only-
restored that.
They could only have 10 characters for enemy's name at a time, so they had to shorten it to Atma Weapon.
Yeah, but basically in the SNES version, Feeble Creatures Go, which made no sense. He's just like wondering why he would say something like that. The actual translations, Feeble Creatures Die. They also had to remove references to demons. Like they were, I believe, Phantom Beasts were the name of the Espers. They had to just rename them to Esper. It was Nintendo's censorship policy in the mid '90s was.
I believe the summons are always called Phantom Beasts, and they come up with a different name for them like every Final Fantasy.
And I
except
think
for 4, I think, because I guess they were called Phantom Beasts back then. In 7, they didn't really have a name. In 9, they were like Eidolons, and in 10, they were Aeons.
I think they were called Islands in 4 as well. Or maybe just a retranslation. Because, you go into the cave of the island eventually. And, that's where Rydia was living for a while. Cover your ears, Nikki, because, you didn't get that far.
I want Rydia back.
You'll get her eventually.
I hope she can forgive me for every time I yelled and cursed at her, every time she missed a monster.
You'll see.
I know.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
But yeah, RPGs, translation-wise, some of them were goofy. They've been restored since then. They had better translations. Chrono Trigger was kind of close to translation, but there were a few things you were wondering about the story. The Nintendo DS version kind of cleared some things up, and of course there was Chrono Cross too.
I think they changed the name of Magus's henchmen, because I know over here...
Yeah, they were condiments, actually.
Yeah, they were vinegar,
mayo, and soy sauce, I think.
Soy sauce, yeah.
And so they changed them, actually, the Rockstar names, Flea / Nazi.
And next time we'll use mustard!
Yeah, there you go.
There you go, mustard.
Yeah, maybe Magus was named Mustard, and actually, no, he wasn't.
Yeah, I know.
No, he's
Magus-
It was
always
like Mal
Magus.
or something.
Magus's name was Demon Lord, and they couldn't translate that.
Demon Lord just translates in Japanese to Mal.
Actually, one of the funniest RPG translations wound up being legendary in Final Fantasy IV.
You spoony bard!
Thank you, Nikki.
sorry, that was like my favorite quote from the game.
The original line was "You son of a bitch."
Yeah,
basically.
the original line was "Kisama," which is like a rude way of saying "you" in Japanese.
Yeah, they couldn't figure out how to translate this. Like more literal, like more accurate translation, I guess, would be "You son of a bitch." But Nintendo definitely didn't want that in their game. So I don't know who translated that part, but they wrote "You spoony bard," which made no sense, but it became so legendary among people playing this game that Square kept it in for any future translation and brought it to Japan as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even fan translations keep it in.
Every translation keeps that line in because it was just hilarious.
There was one thing I actually noticed about it. If you haven't played 4, I guess I'm kind of spoiling something for you, but like when you fight the Leviathan, you lose your entire party. You know, your entire party goes different areas. I got Edward back, and Edward was not got him back, but I saw him and found him again, which I had Tella in the group with me. There was kind of, it looked like a translation error where he said that Anna was his son, I forget exactly, or he said Edward was his son who died against the Barons, and I'm like, that's not what happened. Or I'm trying to remember exactly the translation.
I can't even help you out with that one because I haven't played the FF2 version, like the Final Fantasy Easy Type, which is called in Japan. I haven't played that version in a while.
Yeah, there was a mistranslation somewhere, and I read, I'm like, what the hell is he talking about?
Actually, the last time I played through that game was the PSP version, the Complete Collection version, which is the same game, it's just updated graphics, and it was the hard type one.
Was that the one that also came with, like, the part 2 of it?
Yeah, I played a little bit of part 2. It seems like it's an standalone RPG on its own, like a classic standalone RPG, but I didn't really get too far into it because, like a lot of other games, piqued my interest at the time. So you could talk about the Final Fantasy series. There's another series, Enix, the action RPG had, we talked about earlier, the Soul Blazer series. Now, the most well-known game in this country was Illusion of Gaia, which received a huge boost from Nintendo. Basically, Nintendo included it into... I'm not sure if they had any involvement aside from the advertising, but they hyped up the game for NX, basically. And it turned out to be kind of a flop, because it was released the same year as Super Metroid, Stunt Race FX, Super Punch-Out,
Donkey Kong Country.
Basically, Nintendo's flagship year. This game was released, and it was like the bastard child of it sandwiched between all of these instant classics. But it was still a fun game. I can go off a bit on the storyline. It was kind of I mean, I've seen better, but you know, action RPG. It was very similar to Zelda, only except you did level up a bit, sort of. You beat enough enemies in the stage. You got like boost to your health, overall health, your maximum like attack and everything. You didn't get new weapons though. You got new techniques after a while. Like after exploring dungeons, you wound up with a new technique for one of the characters. So I guess that's where the RPG elements. The best game in the series was the third one. It was called Terranigma. It was never released in the U.S. and even to this day, it's still not released officially in the U.S. It was released, I believe, in the European Union, Australia, and obviously Japan. It was made by a Australian developer, Quintance, and it was released in '95, the same year that the PlayStation and Saturn hit the U.S. So, you know, a lot of Nintendo licenses were going by the wayside around that point. And obviously it was officially translated into English because it was released in Japan. However, it never made its way to the U.S. shores, and Quentin ran out of money. And this was around the time Enix was struggling as well. So eventually it was scooped up by Square, and we have Square Enix. But it was a forgotten license, and it was a fantastic game.
It really was, yeah. The cool thing that I really liked about it was how similar in gameplay it was to A Link to the Past, where like you have, what's the main character's name?
Oh, Ark.
Ark, that's his name. Yes, thank you. You had Ark. He was kind of the stereotypical like bad boy of the of his village. He was like pulling pranks. He was pretty much like generic as it is. Like, he's pulling pranks. There's a little the love interest.
Yeah, he already had an established love interest, but that has nothing to do with what this game is about. Like, once you start getting a little farther in, you realize that nothing is as it seems in this level, in this game.
Anyone he has established relationships with?
Yeah, you'll figure out why.
Yeah.
This is one game I really don't want to spoil.
No.
Because the storyline was so deep. It was ridiculous. It was one of the few games I beat, and I was like, oh, wow.
It's a really beautiful game, too.
Yeah, beautifully done. The music's beautiful. A little bit repetitive after a while, but it is beautiful. And, like, the Soul Blazer was the less known of these series. But Soul Blazer established, basically, that you started off in an empty world, and every time you went into this dungeon and killed things, like, you restored parts to the world. The dungeons in Illusion of Gaia were like that, but the world was already basically established. And Terra Enigma, basically everything you do established part of the world, and you'll figure it out. Play it. It's
a great game. I guarantee you will love it.
All right, enough about us rambling about RPGs. We have a top 10 coming up next week, so.
We hope you'll enjoy our list.
Yeah, we debated long and hard over the lists.
We actually did statistical math stuff too.
Statistic analysis of all these RPGs we've played over the years, and we have a master list now. So, hopefully you guys tune in next week to our top 10. Thanks for listening to us today. If you want more information on the 240p Club, you want to go to our website, 240pclub.com. Also, we have facebook.com/240p Club, and we're also on twitch.tv under 240p Club.